Hello, welcome to Illinois Stories. I'm Mark McDonald at the Mellow Cream plant in Springfield. If you grew up in Springfield, there's a good chance you grew up on donuts like this. Well, this is not a retail establishment. In fact, donuts from this 80,000 square foot plant go all over the country. At any given time, there may be $1 million worth of donuts in the freezer here. You should see how they do it. Well, Dave Waltrip, the first stop in the process of a Mellow Cream donut, it starts right here in the dry warehouse.
Right.
From the floor to the ceiling, you got this thing just stacked with product.
Right.
What's in here?
Well, all of our dry material comes into the dry side of the warehouse, and roughly we've got about 180 different ingredients that we're going to combine together to make over 180 varieties of donuts. The majority of the stuff that you see in the in storage here, they're raw materials that we have a recipe, the Mellow Cream secret formula recipe, that we've had blended for us, but we go out to a company that's in custom manufacturing and they would blend the product up for us. Just put it in a bag, comes in here, that way none of our employees know what the recipe is, and we can kind of, it's easier to handle it that way to where we're dumping one bag at a time instead of having to do with all these micro ingredients.
So it truly is a secret, sort of like Coca-Cola. I mean, the recipe, even the employees don't know what the recipe
Absolutely,
is.
absolutely.
Because you have your suppliers giving you or mixing for you a variety of things, and unless you're in on it, there's no way to track it back down, is
Right,
there?
and we typically do not give any one supplier any of the whole picture, so they can't see the whole picture of what we're actually trying to do. So they may have one piece of this, but they don't know the remaining pieces that we do to try to keep this thing so no one sees what the secret formula is, if you will.
Now, and we're looking at some bags now. You know, you have Dawn and Pillsbury. You've got a number of suppliers. Now, one of the what I thought was mysterious. I'm the only one that didn't know this. Apparently, this is well known that you have dried potato flakes in your recipe. That's part of what gives it the consistency and the creaminess that Mellow Cream likes.
Right.
So that's part of the secret's out. But that's really all.
That's probably the biggest secret that we talk about with that, and it comes from when Kelly was a young man. One of his jobs as a child was had to come to school or had to go to work after school and actually peel potatoes and put the mashed potatoes in there. Not something that he looked forward to, obviously. But after the invention of potato flour, then he didn't have to do that. Then we could start adding in the potato flour and get the consistency of it. So, and we still use it today. It's a big ingredient of what we use. It's just one of them micro ingredients that gets blended into a bag of product in our recipe to make sure that we keep the recipe the way it was. So it's the same recipe. It's just new technology that's helping us to get it done in a quicker time frame.
And you mentioned Kelly. Kelly's been leading this company for, gosh, what, 40, 50 years maybe?
50 plus years.
And
yes.
Kelly Grant, we'll visit with him a little bit later about the history of the company. But right now, I guess what you and I need to do, since we've seen the dry product, is go in and see what happens to all this stuff, huh?
That sounds good.
Now, Dave, we're mixing the product here. This is the first, past the dry period, this is the first mixing, right?
Right, we're going to take the product, the dry ingredients from the warehouse that we were just in, we're going to take and combine flour and our special recipe, water and yeast gets put into the mixing system. We got a double mixing system with 5 carousels or 5 bowls in the carousel. We've got about an 8 to 10 minute mix time, and then once it's done, the mixers raise up, it rotates to the next position. When it's done through the final position, then it gets elevated up into the air. There's about 600 pounds of dough in that bowl that's going up now. It's going to get dumped into the dough feeder before it starts its process down the production line.
Okay, so we're seeing that. That's been mixed. It's being raised up now. When it gets to the top, it'll dump the dough out into, and then it'll be cut? Is that what
No, it's going to go in as one large batch.
And 600 pounds worth.
Right.
Oh, wow.
Then on the other side of it, I'll show you how it cuts it into pieces, and then we start running it down the production line.
Okay. Well, if we look to our right, then we'll see that it's elevating and it's getting near the top. We're going to see it dump out there.
Right.
Okay. Now, what's in that big vat that's been mixed? What's in there?
Well, it's going to be flour, water, yeast, a few donuts that we use as flavor that have fermentation flavor to them, or donuts that came off the production line.
Here it goes.
got a scraper in there. It'll turn on and it'll scrape it right out into the dough feeder.
Just like we did as kids, right?
Right.
Scrape the bowl. Must be thick. That's turning, yeah.
So we're going to see a big blob come flying out of there. There we go.
There's the dough. And that was 600
About
pounds
600
worth.
pounds.
Wow. Okay, Dave, 600 pounds of dough just flopped down into the dough feeder.
Right.
What goes on next?
Well, now that we've got that large mass of dough, we need to cut it into individual pieces. We're going to take the tension out of the dough, then we're going to glue it back into individual pieces, or from individual back into one continuous sheet. And that's what the dough feeder here, this first piece of equipment, is doing for us. Took the big dough, it cut it in a sheet, it's running through the rollers, it's coming down out of the bottom of it, and now you see it, it's one continuous ribbon. We've got dusting flour on top because we're going to compress it. That's going to make it thinner and wider. We don't want it to stick to any of the equipment, so there's a flour duster that's putting the flour on top of it.
Okay, well, just like in Mom's kitchen, you use a little flour on there to keep it sticking, huh?
And instead of a rolling pin,
Yeah.
we're using automated machines that are doing the same thing. That is basically rolling the dough this way and rolling the dough this way.
And it has to be done gradually,
It
doesn't it?
has to be done very gradually so that we don't tear up the dough and
Yeah.
destroy the cell structure. As we come down the line, you can see that from each step, the dough got a little bit thinner and a little bit wider as it goes through each one of these pieces of equipment. And we're doing that in about 6 steps to get down to our final thickness and our final width to where we're going to cut it into a long john today.
Okay. Oh, these are long johns that we're going to be
Long
looking at, huh? Now, I notice up here, before it gets cut, you've got these spindles poking holes into the dough. What's the
Right.
reason for that?
We call that a docker, and at this point the dough, with the cutters on the line, we've taken that one sheet of dough, we've stripped it into 5 individual pieces, and now to make sure that when the dough fries that it doesn't blister or get gas cells inside it, we run this pin docker on it, and it pushes holes down through the dough to allow that gas to escape so that it doesn't cause a blister inside the dough.
Okay. So now you've got it stripped and you've got it poked. What's this? Is this a cutter here that's going
It's a
up and down?
guillotine cutter. And now what we need to do is cut them from a sheet of dough into the individual pieces about 1.5 inches wide. So you can see on this side of it, it's one long ribbon of dough, and if we go over to the other side, we can see how they turn into individual pieces.
Well, sure enough. Now those look kind of small to people that are looking for a long john. I mean, those look a little small.
Well, they have not been proofed. The yeast that's inside there is not active yet, and that's the next process that's going to take place. So they're actually a third the size that they'll be when it comes out of the end of the fryer.
I see. More
And-
like a cookie now. It's going to swell up like a donut.
Right.
Like a long john, yeah.
And what we're automatically doing, this entire production line is computer controlled to make sure that all these belt speeds are matched in time so that it falls off here on the right place and then it falls off here. Then we're going to automatically load it into the proof box. And it's landing on this tray here. The tray pulls out from under it, drops it down on the white tray, which is the flight that goes into the proof box. The proofing side of this is where we have its temperature and humidity controlled environment, and the product's going to stay in there for 45 minutes to allow the yeast to raise in a conditioned environment to grow. Now I'm going to grab one of these and take it with us so we can see what it looks like at the beginning, and then we'll see what it looks like at the end. So that's basically what a raw long john, it hasn't been frozen yet, but the yeast inside hasn't proofed or raised, okay? So as we walk around the other side of the machine, we'll be able to see them inside there, we'll see them dump out, and we'll see them growing as we go along the way, okay?
Well, Dave, proof was not a term that I was familiar with, but we're looking at that proof process right now.
Correct.
That simply means that you're allowing the yeast to raise in the donut, right?
And I think it comes from proving to prove that the actual yeast is doing its job. But what we'll see is the product's going to raise up, and you'll be able to tell by the size of the product that it's doing it. Now what we've got, so we don't take up so much room or length down this room, inside this large stainless steel box, there's conveyors that go up and down and up and down. There's 5 pieces in just each section of this. So it actually takes 45 minutes to go from this end down to the other end where we're going to be putting it into the
That's how you
fryer.
can put so many pieces of dough in at one time.
Right.
I mean, so way to do it.
There's about 24 about 2,400 pounds of dough in this right now.
Okay. Well, I'm going to be interested to see just how big and fat one of these babies get.
Now we can see this has been in there for 45 minutes. This is the unproof version. This is the proof version. And it's very, very delicate. The yeast has allowed it to grow up and the cells have been developed inside. But if I push on it too hard, it just collapsed it. And what we need to do to set that, it needs to go into the fryer. The temperature of the fryer is going to set the starch in it and make the donuts keep its shape. It'll also get bigger inside the fryer too.
Just follow these little babies down as they float through the fryer.
So it takes 2 minutes to fry a donut, a minute on each side. So it's a minute to get to the turner that we see here. They run into the turner, they're going to flip them over to the other side to fry the other side.
Isn't that interesting? Well, Dave, okay, it took 2 minutes to fry the donut.
2 minutes to fry the donut.
Okay.
Now we're coming out of the donut and we've got about a 220-degree core temperature. We want to make sure that that core temperature gets back down to room temperature so that we don't damage it when we freeze it. If this was an item that had jelly inside it, it would get cooled down and it would get punched with jelly. We're not doing that today, but we need to have some space that we can cool the product off without, again, taking up this whole room. So the unit behind us is a spiral cooler, and there's about 400 feet of belt on here. It takes 45 minutes for the product to run around on this.
Okay, so it's making its way up this conveyor here.
Right, going up to the top, spiraling around. And then
Look at those little devils peeping out there.
And then about 45 minutes on this. When the product comes down the discharge chute on the other side, we're about 74 degrees inside the room, and they will be at 74 degrees temperature so that we can take them on to the next step if we were going to punch them. If not, then they just proceed on to the freezing process.
Now, Dave, these are the donuts, or just like them, the Long Johns that we just saw coming along the conveyor. They've cooled now.
They've cooled. They're down to room temperature.
And if you were going to fill these, that's what this station here would have been for. Fill them
right.
with jelly or
you can see the needle that's on the end there, and they would pick the donuts up. They slide it onto the needle, a pump turns on, and it injects whatever filling inside the donut. These items we're not filling, we're going to be doing that a little later, but that's how the process takes place.
And now these are cool enough for you to pick up, and
these are cool enough. These are down to 74 degrees, 72 to 74 degrees. Now what the process is, we had to get them back to room temperature so they don't go through a bad thermal shock, because we're going to take them into our blast freezer. It's 25 degrees below zero. They'll stay about 30 minutes inside the freezer, and they'll come out rock hard, and I'll show you that on the other side when we get there.
As a matter of fact, if we look just above our head here, we can see the last of a batch going right into that freezer.
Right.
And there they go. Okay, they're coming out of the flash freezer. How long did it take for these little babies to get frozen?
They've been in there about 30 to 35 minutes. Again, it's 25 degrees below zero. They're going to slide down the chute. They're going to run under this white aperture, which is a metal detector. We want to make sure that we don't have any contaminants in the product from the manufacturing process. If it did detect something, the conveyor is set up automatically that the conveyor moves out of the way. The product falls down into a bin. Quality assurance department comes and reviews what is in there. Most of the time we don't find anything. It's just very sensitive. You know, it could be the humidity that day that caused it to drift.
You know, they don't look any different, but they're frozen, huh?
They are, and I'll grab one on this side here. They're very much frozen, and you can see that it'll break in too. And it's very, very hard.
Frozen hard as a rock.
We got about a 10-degree core temperature on that product. So we were fried at 375. We got it down to about 220 out of the fryer, 74 on the cooling tower, and now we're about a 10-degree core temperature on it.
And now you want to get those back in the freezer pretty
now
quick,
we want to
don't
get them packed, and we want to get them in the freezer so they don't warm back up.
Dave, these boxes have already been assembled.
Right.
And there's plastic. You have an operator that's put plastic in them.
That's correct.
But actually the feeding process is by robot, isn't it? I mean, it's done automatically.
Right. What we're looking at, the conveyors that are under here are actually scales. The product's coming off after you see the last quality control inspector's looking at the product. It comes down, there's a scale on that conveyor, it's weighing it or filling it until the weight gets to the right weight. When it's full, the box will move forward, the conveyor turns directions and runs up over here and starts feeding this box. 2 new boxes will come underneath it to continue the process on.
Isn't that neat? Okay.
After it leaves here, the operator then, he's got one final scale. He takes it over, looks at it, verifies that the weight is actually what it should be, as a double check. If it is correct, then he'll fold the flaps on the box, push it down. The carton goes on a little ride underneath this conveyor. It follows itself around. It goes over, the top flaps get closed, gets tape put across it to seal it up. Then you can see it going up the hill here, and it's going to run down onto this side where we're going to put a label on the product.
And that process, the labeling process, is done right here, and what that'll tell you is what batch it was and what's the content.
What's in the product, what was the batch code that's on it, what day it was manufactured, what shift it was manufactured on.
And then you want to get it back in the freezer.
We want to get it back in there, so we're going to palletize it and then put it in the freezer for storage. The labels get printed. As soon as it looks at that, it reads it, it's going to tell it what to do. It prints the label and applies the label automatically. Then the very last step in the process, it's going to stop on this conveyor again, which is our last check weigher. If that weight is not right, that conveyor elevates, it rolls it down this way out of the way, just to make sure that everything we did on the front side, that we're actually putting the right weight in the box before it leaves here. Now the product is going into a palletizing room where there's a robotic palletizer that's going to palletize that for us. Then it's automatically going to be put into our freezer. We'll walk around there, but everything in that room is 100% automated. Nobody has to do anything inside there. And it's 34 degrees in there, and it became kind of a room where nobody wanted to work all the time. So we tried to figure out something better to do about this, and I think we came up with a good solution. So it'll be interesting to show you that.
Okay, Dave, apparently this robot doesn't mind working in the cold.
It doesn't mind working in the cold. It's 34 degrees in here, and we've got 2 lines that it palletizes off of. As the product comes in, the robot knows which line it's on. It'll go pick the box up, it stacks it on the pallet. It'll get its own pallet when it needs to, but once this pallet's full, it's going to move forward, a cart's going to turn on, come over and pick this pallet up.
There it goes.
Take it over, it's going to take it back onto the stretch wrapper, automatically stretch wrap it, and then doors will open and it'll feed it into the freezer.
Wow, is that something?
Without anybody being involved with it.
Isn't that something? Okay, so there's another moving part coming to platform to take this away. And
The robot's getting its own pallet right now.
yeah, he does, doesn't he? He picks up his. So somebody's got to keep the pallets stacked.
Yeah, somebody puts them in a magazine, and then
yeah.
that's the only human interaction that we've got.
Isn't that neat?
Now this is going to go down to the end. It'll actually go backwards behind that danger sign. It's going to spin it around and put stretch wrap on it before the doors open, and it'll put it into the freezer for storage.
Now you designed this plant.
We designed this plant. This was the robot was a piece of equipment that we purchased, but we had a gentleman inside that works for us. We tried to get an integrator to do this, and they said you couldn't make it all happen in this small of an area. Well, we didn't like that, so he went to work on it. John Armstrong's his name, and he's a computer guy, and I'm a mechanical guy. We got our heads together, and we came up with this. Bought the robot, bought the components, put the thing in, and it's been working for about 5 or 6 years now.
Well, Dave, this is the big freezer.
This is the main storage freezer.
Wow.
And we have, on any given time, about $1 million worth of donuts sitting in here. We actually run about a 2.5 week worth of inventory, plus orders that are going to be shipped out for the next week are in storage here. So you can see this aisle here. This is an order that's getting ready to go out, plus all the product that's stacked up inside here.
One donut at a time.
One donut at a time.
Wow.
And we're 10 below zero inside here.
I was going to say, it feels pretty nippy.
We have guys that work in here 8 hours a day, and it just, I don't know how they do it, but I'm glad that they do it for us. It is very, very cold. But in the wintertime, they sleep with the window open and the fan on because it's warm compared to where they work at, you know, so.
Well, Dave, we're in an area of the plant known as the lab, and there are a lot of things that go on here, but One of the things that happens here is quality assurance, and I
Right.
guess that's what Cindy is doing right
That's
now.
correct.
What does she do?
Out of all the batches of dough that we make, we've got standards that they were manufactured to, and we keep track of the batches out on the production line. What they'll do is they pull samples from each one of the batches, and they mark the bag for her. She brings them in here, takes them, she's weighing each one of them now, looking at the size of them, looking at the shape, the color, making sure that they weigh right according to the spec book. If everything meets our standards, then it gets put into the freezer as storage. But what we do, everything that's manufactured gets put on a quality hold before we allow it to be shipped to our customers to make sure that it meets all the criteria. Once she said that it's okay, we also, like on the frozen dough items, we'll take and proof and bake them to make sure that it actually raises and proofs up to the size and the color that we're looking for. Once that's been done, once that meets the criteria, then we'll reduce it from hold, put it into our actual inventory, then we'll allow for the warehouse people to actually pick it out of inventory and then be put on a truck to be shipped.
And you keep, like you said, you keep these samples for a long period of time, because if anything were ever to happen where somebody got sick or a donut didn't taste right or something, the government requires you to keep samples
We
so
have
that you
to
can
keep,
trace it back.
Right. We would split a sample with them. Let's say we had an issue, and you hear about recalls today. We've never had a recall, thank God, hoping that we never do.
Yeah.
But this government wants to split a sample with us so that we've got one and they've got one, and we make sure we compare and see what was in that. At the same time, on the positive side of this, if a customer calls and says, hey, we have an issue with this, we want to be able to go grab the dough that we made and the one they've got at their store. We put it in the proofer, we see, did it proof to time, did it come up, did it look like it was supposed to look, so that way we've got something on this end that we can show them that we're on top of what we're doing with that.
Right.
So,
Well, let's show the audience where you keep this, because this is an eye opener too. And this is not the only freezer you
no,
use
this is a part of the freezer.
Wow, Dave, frozen donuts stacked to the ceiling.
Absolutely. What we have to do here, and what you see, there's frozen dough and pre-fried dough that's in here. The shelf life of the frozen dough is 90 days. The shelf life of the pre-fried donuts is 180 days. So we have to keep samples of that for the entire shelf life. This is the first place that they go. Once we run out of room in here, they get moved into our big storage freezer. And then at the end of the shelf life, they get pulled out of there, and then we've got this constant rotation that's going on a weekly basis.
So that's what
to
Cindy's
keep
part of
track.
her job is,
That's
to make
exactly
sure that
what
the
she's
90-day ones get circulated out of here.
Right. Absolutely.
Wow.
And it's a big job to make sure that what we say we're going to produce, that we actually ship that to the customers and they're happy with that. So it takes a lot of time and effort, but that's what it takes to make sure that we do our job.
Well, Kelly Grant, you're the oldest of 6 kids.
Right.
Your dad, Kelly Sr., started this business in 1931, or got into this business in 1931.
1932. 1932, yeah.
He must have been a little bit worried in the height of the Depression to start taking on a new business.
Well, he had to be. I can't even believe that he actually did that. He left a job at a time when unemployment was like 25%, to go into a venture in an area or activity he knew nothing about, had no background in it whatsoever.
Yeah.
But he had about $900 and some in the bank he'd been saving over the years. He wanted to be in business for himself. And he was out sourcing for a Red Feather Drive and came upon this gentleman that had a little donut shop on Jefferson Street. And of course the conversation, he found that it was for sale. They struck a deal and he bought it. Actually, the asking price was $1,000. They settled at $500. My dad gave him half of that, with the understanding that when he taught him the business, he'd give him the other half. The gentleman took off in 2 days. So that's how he got into the donut business.
Well, your dad learned a lot, but together with you and your brother-in-law, the 3 of you were in business for a long time. Your dad lived to be a ripe old age, and he helped you out for a long time, didn't he?
Oh yeah, he worked, actually was pretty active in the business until he was in his 80s anyway, middle 80s, before he finally walked away from it. And it was interesting. I didn't think he ever would, but when we walked away from it, he stayed away.
It's incredible how you went from running a handful of donut shops, retail donut shops, to what you have here now.
Well, it's one of those cases where, the old saying that when one door closes, another one opens. And the thing that we just kind of progressed from one activity to another, and they did follow naturally one on the other. We started out with a single retail shop, then we went to and with some wholesale business, restaurants and grocery stores. We went from that to try to do a regional franchise. Well, we went to multi-unit retail first, then went to try to do a regional franchise. That didn't work out because of the high interest rates and Mr. Volcker's war on inflation. Took our product line to a distributor for supermarkets. They loved it, incorporated it into their program. We thought this is a wonderful opportunity. We moved into that. So it's kind of progressed from there.
When you go into a grocery store, say in the Midwest, maybe in Pennsylvania, Indiana, there's a good chance that if you get a dozen donuts, you're getting mellow creams.
There's a really good chance, but you won't know they're mellow cream. They make them up and present them as their own product. They go in there in a mellow cream carton, but when they come out to the customer, the customer has no idea where they came from.
And the reason is because when you sell a mellow cream donut, you want it to look perfect.
Well, that's right.
These are beautiful, and the name mellow cream means a lot. And if you can't guarantee that store is going to dress a donut like this.
That's exactly right, and that's one reason why we've kept the mellow cream name out of it, even though probably 90% of our production right now is directed toward that particular market.
Yeah, it's been a great business, hasn't it?
It has been a great business. And I wouldn't, if you'd asked me that a couple of years ago, I might have said no.
Well, it does have its ups and downs.
That's right. It's the old saying, you know, 1 year chickens, next year feathers, and it's kind of run that way. I think, though, in general, in retrospect, it has been a good business. It's been challenging. It's been interesting. Sometimes exciting. Sometimes very disappointing. But I guess every business probably runs that same gamut of situations and emotions. And
we mentioned your dad living to be a ripe old age. You're now, don't look like it, but you're in your 80s. Do you think about retirement?
Yeah, I'm kind of, I'd say semi-retired right now. I stay around here because I love the activity and I like to see what's going on. I've done it for so many years. It's just part of me, and so I treat myself as a resource for the guys here. But I've got a really good group of people who are here to take care of all the day-to-day problems and situations in the business, and I'm very comfortable with it. So it's fun for me.
Well, thanks for letting us go through. I think our audience has found this very interesting.
Good. I hope they do. We do tours, and people find it, it's always surprising to them, and they really tend to enjoy it, particularly if we give them a donut at the end of the tour.
Donuts ride up and down those conveyors 24 hours a day, 5 days a week. They clean on weekends. It takes more than 100 employees to keep this plant operating. This year they expect to do $16 million in revenues. That's a lot of donuts. With another Illinois story in Springfield, I'm Mark McDonald. Thanks for watching.
For a DVD copy of this episode of Illinois Stories, send $19.95 to Network Knowledge, P.O. Box 6248, Springfield, Illinois 62708. Be sure to include the program name, broadcast date, and topic. You may also order with your credit card by calling 800-232-3605 or by using our secure server by going online to networkknowledge.tv.